The tram line cut above the sprawl on a skeletal rail that hung between sectors without belonging to any of them, carrying people across distances that'd take too long to cross on foot without running into something that slowed them down. Sid had watched it for years without needing it, but his tank had been running low again, even after the last payout, and he wasn't about to risk stalling out somewhere between sectors like he had before. So the idea of moving through space without that kind of friction made more sense this time. He stepped onto the platform and let the movement around him settle before the tram arrived, because places like this revealed themselves if you gave them a second. The patterns in how people stood and shifted told you more than anything posted or spoken. The tram slid in along the elevated rail in a linked run of cars, a J10 run cutting through this part of the sprawl, metal joints flexing as it slowed. Its doors opened down the length of it in sequence without announcement, nothing like the upscale mag rails closer to the core city, with their sanitized female voices calling arrivals and departures. Sid stepped into one of the cars and let the doors close behind him as the rest sealed down the line. The interior held a steady dimness that matched everything else out here, worn down to a level where nothing tried to stand out. Sid took a position near a side rail and let the car's motion settle through him as the tram lifted and carried him out over the multi-layered spread of the sprawl. The connected cars stretched ahead and behind him through open passage gaps, and people shifted between them as the train moved, adjusting their positions without making anything of it, while stacked structures and crossing lines below suggested a kind of order until you followed any one path long enough to see where it broke. Below him, the ground level dropped off farther than most people ever saw, unless they had a reason to look for it, buried under platforms that held entire sections of the city above it. The tram glided between vertical stacks of hab blocks and commercial tiers, each level carrying its own flow of movement. Walkways cut across the gaps between them, thin spans that swayed just enough to remind you what sat under your feet, while older freeway lines pushed through at different heights, threading the structure together in ways that only made sense from a distance. Light came and went in patches. Holo ads flickered against building faces where the projection fields struggled to hold, breaking apart mid-loop before snapping back into place, faces stuttering, colors washing out, then locking in again just long enough to sell whatever they were pushing. Farther out, a pair of slow-moving airships drifted across the upper lanes, their underlights brushing the edges of the platforms as they passed. Closer in, people moved along the tiers in steady lines, some crossing the spans, others gathering in pockets where the space opened up. At one stretch, the structure widened into a raised park that looked like it had been assembled rather than grown. Low artificial hills sat uneven across the surface, their covering worn thin in places, and a shallow pond held a dull, brackish sheen that caught what little light reached it. A few figures moved through it without urgency, following paths that curved more for appearance than function, before the tram carried past and folded it back into the rest of the sprawl. Sid's attention settled on a couple trying to blend into the pattern, and the longer he watched, the more the attempt showed through what they'd built. Their clothes carried the right kind of wear, but didn't sit with the same natural weight, and their bodies didn't adjust to the motion of the tram in the same way. Their hands stayed free, and that marked them faster than anything else could have. Slummers. Some from the core, some from districts close enough to touch it, all of them passing through the sprawl, chasing whatever they couldn't get where they lived, and hopefully leaving before anything could go wrong. Where they came from didn't allow for that kind of mischief. Not publicly, anyway. When the tram slowed at Sector 18 and the doors opened along the cars, they stepped off with the rest, heading into a stretch known for black market sex and other degenerate trade. The space they left behind closed without a pause. The tram carried on, rocking slightly as it slowed again with Sector 20 approaching, and the outside shifted before the train fully stopped. There was more light than necessary, and more people holding positions instead of passing through, as if the space itself encouraged people to stay and watch instead of move on. When the doors opened down the line, Sid stepped off into it. Movement here carried intention rather than momentum, with people holding positions that gave them sightlines across each other without making it obvious, and conversations happening in angles instead of direct lines. Transactions lived in the way bodies aligned rather than anything openly exchanged, and the space didn't push you through it so much as ask what you were doing there. Sid let the PDW sit visible along his side without any effort to conceal it. The worn frame and the way the magazine rode in it, telling their own story to anyone who knew how to read it. Near the far end of the platform, just outside the main flow where the overhead light broke uneven across a support pillar, a young blonde girl stood. She occupied a pocket of space that made her visible if you were looking for her, but easy to miss if your attention stayed on movement. Her clothes matched the environment, but the way she held herself gave her away. Eyes tracking everything, hands never settling. She looked like she had somewhere to go and no way to get there. Sid slowed without thinking. The thought came anyway. Step over and say something to her. Something simple that might redirect things before the wrong part of this place closed in. He watched longer than he meant to. It wouldn't take much to cross the distance, and once he did, it wouldn't stay simple. He hesitated. A tall man stepped into his line of sight. Blazer over a t-shirt. A gold medallion with a tiger's head caught the light. Dark hair parted to one side, brushing his shoulders. Eyes moving constantly, tracking everything. Then they settled on Sid.
You're late.
For what?
Sid let the question sit just long enough for it to shift into something else.
That piece won't hold.
Well, it still works.
For now.
The exchange settled between them without strain or ease. Just a shared understanding of what was already true. The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a thin pass, holding it between his fingers for a moment before offering it over. Then it clicked. Bannon. Dandy Roulette's Syndicate. The kind of middleman who didn't move product himself but made sure it got where it needed to go, threading people to things that sometimes came with consequences. Skag Lad ran the outfit, a brute with a heightened taste for damage, and everything tied to his name carried a cost that didn't always show up right away. Sid hesitated, but not for long. He took the pass from Bannon anyway. Too late to give it back now. Sid rolled the pass once between his fingers. The etched number caught the light just enough to read, and it took him a second before something else registered. 47 wasn't just a number. It was a cut that ran through one of the old warehouse corridors people didn't talk about directly. But anyone moving gear through this part of the sprawl knew what it was. Bannon shifted, and Sid caught a glimpse of where the girl had been standing, long enough to confirm she was still there. Then he turned away before the moment could pull him back into it. The sound reached him before the building. A low Tektron pulse moved through the structures ahead and settled into his chest. The closer he got, the stronger it hit, shaping the space around it. The streets widened into loading corridors and reinforced paths built for volume, even if most of it sat unused. The warehouse revealed itself through the sound as much as the light. A large open doorway spilled brightness across the ground, flashing light cutting through it in uneven bursts. Bouncers held position at either side with a stillness that didn't invite questions. People moved through under their watch. The ones who didn't belong didn't get far. Sid avoided the front and followed the outer edge of the structure instead, where the light fell off and movement thinned out. He crept along it using broken sight lines and stacked containers to stay out of the main flow until he found a service access that hadn't been sealed properly, slipping through without drawing attention. Inside opened wider, and the pulsing sound rolled through the space in waves. A runway cut down the center of the main warehouse floor, raised just enough to separate it from the crowd. Advanced lighting made everything read clearly from every angle, while models moved along the runway carrying various weapons and wearing custom-built gear. The crowd gathered here reflected everything that fed into a place like this. Gangers stood beside syndicate types and independent buyers. A few suited figures held position along the edges, watching and measuring what passed in front of them. Sid stayed back and let the space show itself. A flamboyant figure known as Sidestreet stood at the head of the runway and controlled the flow with small movements that no one questioned. His posture was relaxed but exact, and his voice carried over the Tektron without needing to rise above it. Sid had seen the fashion icon on feeds before, and there he was in the flesh, holding his ever-present toy dog, Lady Snowflake, tucked in one arm like it belonged there as much as anything else in the room. A model of indeterminate gender, wearing a sleek commando-style outfit with a tight half-shirt underneath, finished a slow turn on the catwalk. The model gave one last controlled pivot before heading back toward the back line.
And wearing that gear like nobody's business. And how'd you like that ventilated shirt? Just perfect for those jungle warfare ops. That outfit was stitched by our very own boss bitch, Gabreil. And speaking of...
Gabreil, an attractive middle-aged model with a slash of dark hair and a knowing smirk, stepped into the light and moved with practiced ease.
Here we have the irreplaceable Gabreil, running a Vector Strand modular vest with a Top Gun harness and a rear-slung Vantage mini missile launcher. Auto pistol by Verlanche.
Gabreil drew the auto pistol and held it just long enough to be read, then holstered it. He reached back, pulled the compact launcher from the rear sling, and brought it up toward the room. His aim traced in a widening arc as bodies gave way, clearing his line without hesitation, drinks tipping and food hitting the ground, accompanied by a few sharp gasps cutting through the music as people moved faster than they meant to.
Oh shit!
Everyone there understood exactly what that piece of hardware could do, and Gabreil held it up just long enough for that understanding to settle before lowering it again and folding the moment back into the flow of the show as if nothing had happened, smirk widening.
Jeez, what a total asshole.
Work that shit!
Sidestreet howled as Gabreil sashayed, riding the moment. After a few controlled turns, the boss bitch, as Sidestreet called Gabreil, rolled a hip, set his stance, and disappeared into the back line. Without realizing it, Sid's head had started to move with the rhythm, the Tektron settling into him as he watched longer than he meant to. The more he took in, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about buying something functional, but about stepping into a system where presentation mattered as much as performance. A runway built for weapons and gear, dressed up and paraded like something else entirely. It hit him then that this was how these people moved product, not across tables by men in dark suits under dim lights, but out in the open, framed, controlled, and sold as something you stepped into instead of merely picked up. And he couldn't deny the brilliance of their method.
Damn, that is clever.
He turned and left the way he came. By the time Sid reached the station again to catch the J-10 back to Sector 17, the platform had shifted the way places like this always did. New faces moved through the same patterns as before. He looked to where the girl had been standing. She wasn't there. Sid let his stride break, dragging his gaze over the platform twice just to confirm she was gone. The image of her slouched by that support pillar kept chewing at him. The empty patch of concrete felt like something he couldn't take back. Whatever route she ended up taking had already swallowed her while he was busy looking for his next move. He stood on the platform, chewing on the math of his hesitation, mapping 4 strides and 2 seconds that would have pushed her out of the sector. He'd kept his distance to avoid dragging a stranger's bad luck into his own orbit. Letting out a breath, he looked down at the pass in his hand, turning it once again between his fingers, then closed his grip around it. His eyes glanced back toward the warehouse.
Yeah, not done here.
The next tram slid in along the elevated rail. Doors opened down the line. Sid stepped forward with the movement and boarded without hesitation, taking his place inside one of the cars as it sealed and pulled away from Sector 20. He didn't look back.